Hello, we are going to look at an example using some real data from the Wall Street Journal, and we're going to look at the CEO pay from many U.S. companies for the fiscal year 2008 that have a revenue of at least $5 billion. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to total up the data. We're going to calculate a 95% confidence interval for the difference between the mean of total and the healthcare. And so total will be all company types. And for healthcare, we're going to be looking at healthcare companies. What conclusions can we draw from this confidence interval? And if the upper and lower limits are both positive, how would that change the conclusion? So just from that statement there, you probably know what's going to happen, but let's go to our data. So we've got a couple things going on because we are going to want to filter out just the healthcare companies. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to come up with some terms here. And actually, I'm going to make some range names because we are going to be using them. We'll just grab all those. So formula, create from selection. We want to grab just the top row. I have a feeling we're going to be using those later anyway. So we're going to start with an if statement. So if I basically want to filter these things out, and I'm going to filter it out based on healthcare. In fact, I'm going to come over here. I want to make these range names too, because once again, I'm fairly certain that we're going to end up using them. Could be wrong, but let's give it a try. So if I come over here, once again, we're going to fill in an if statement. So the logical test, I want to know if B2 is equal to whatever's in category 1. So in this case, we've got healthcare written down. So if it is healthcare, we want it to spit out healthcare. If it's not, we're going to spit out the second category. Now, I could be using quotations and writing in the text and whatnot, but that's the nice thing about tying things in. I'll double click that, go down, and we can see we're going to get some healthcare services and whatnot. Now, we're going to need to deal with total salary instead of just the individual salaries. So salary plus bonus. I wish I got a bonus that was 2 and 3 times my salary. And so we're going to calculate that, and we're going to calculate that down completely. Now, since we are going to be calculating out pooled data and taking a look at things, I'm going to add a couple of columns in here because I'm going to need to eventually calculate out the standard deviation of those salaries. And I want to be able to filter those whether or not that it's healthcare or other. And there are a couple different ways to do it. I'm just actually going to make new columns and pull that out. But we're going to get to that. We'll get to that here in a second. So the first thing that I want to do is sample size. I want to count those out. So my group 1, category 1 is going to be healthcare. So we're going to use a count if statement. So I'm going to count if my range. And so my range is going to be this healthcare column here. So we'll start typing it in, healthcare with the question mark. And so I want you to calculate that column. And what am I looking for? I'm looking for whether or not it's category 1. And so we have 28 in there. And so I'm going to drag this down. Still says 28, but instead of category 1, I want to shift to category 2. And so that tells me there's 353 of them. Okay. So that's great. So those are our sample sizes. Now we want to move on to average. We want to get the mean. So we're going to do the average, but we're going to do an average if statement because I only want to average the values if they match my criteria. And so that first criteria I'm going to use is just going to be that count criteria. So I'm going to use the healthcare, and if it's category 1, so food is healthcare. And then after that, what I want to do is I want to look at that total salary. So if that's my range and that's my criteria, and then the next thing that I want to do is I want you to average up my total. And once again, range names makes that easy. And so that gives me a sample mean of $3 million. And we'll put the $sign in there for that. Actually, all of these will be $signs. So I'm just going to immediately go and put the $sign in. So sample for 2, it's going to be the same thing for 1, except we're going to be looking at category 2. So that's everything else. So there's our mean. And then we're going to calculate out the difference between those. So sample mean 1 minus sample mean 2. So our healthcare individuals make about $634,000 more a year. So now I want to break up my standard deviations. And this is where I'm going to filter my data. There's a couple different ways to do this. I'm just going to go with, I'm going to make some new columns. So we'll call that, in fact, we'll leave this very generic so we could be able to run things with different numbers. So we'll call cat 1 total, so category 1 total, cat 2 total. I could call this healthcare and other, but like I said, I want to leave this to where we can make this very general and be able to shoot out the sheets. Okay, so I'm going to write an if statement. And so that test is going to be, since this is going to be for cat 1, if this is equal to category 1. So if this is an actual healthcare thing, I want it to spit out my total. And if it's not, I want it to spit out nothing. So we're just going to leave that blank. And so that got left blank. I will drag this over and then I will fix this because I don't want it to be executive. I want it to be healthcare. So we'll just go back and change that to C2. And then H2, I actually want it to be G2. And then the last thing is I want it to be category 2, not category 1. Okay. And so I will drop that. I will grab it down. And there we go. And we're going to give these guys new range names too. And so data, formulas, create from selection, and just the top row. So now I've named those columns. So let's go in and let's find the standard deviation of 1. So equal stdev of the sample. And those numbers, we're going to pick category 1 total. And so we'll execute that out. And so I get 1.732. On stdev, the reason I have blanks in there instead of zeros, if I put zeros in, that would have thrown the numbers off. Blanks, it just ignores it as it calculates down. So we'll do the same thing, except I'll change this to category 2. And so there we go. There's my standard deviation of my second category. And once again, since it ignores all of the zeros, it makes things easy. Otherwise, we'd have to do one of the other methods. Okay, so I'm going to pause this here. On the other side, in the second video, we'll actually fill out the rest of this information and we will answer our questions.